Damn cat hair. All right, what's up, everybody? During my junior year in 92, before I dropped out in 93 because I was going to get left back, uh, when I actually did show up for school, I'd spend the whole day in school suspension, like detention, kind of like the Breakfast Club, except it was actual during an actual school day and less culturally impactful and fun. But I loved it because every day spent there was one less day I had to put up with all the bullies. And while I was in there, if my head wasn't down asleep on, just sound asleep on the desk in a puddle of my own drool, I was most likely reading books on serial killers. And I took all these books from my father's collection, and he was also on the same kick as I was, because this was around the time when Dahmer was making headlines. And I got to read about all the A-listers, Henry Lee Lucas, Boston Strangler, Hillside Strangler, Son of Sam, Albert Fish, all those creeps. And don't blame my dad for my morbid curiosity. I got there completely on my own because of my fascination with horror movies since the age of 9. So it's not his fault. At least I don't think so.
Who taught you how to do this stuff?
You, all right? I learned it by watching you.
One book that caught my eye was Deviant by Harold Schechter, if I remember correctly pronouncing it, Deviant. Friggin' dumbass, but I didn't even know what the word meant, but who cares? But anyway, that's where I originally learned about Ed Gein. I heard that Ryan Murphy, his next monster series, is about Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield. And look, most of us over the age of 40, we know who Gein was, right? His run of depravity, that took place during the old nifty 50s. And when he got busted, he went from just neighborhood oddity to infamous psycho overnight. And everybody quickly learned that this dude's reality, they were like Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, like Kanye West and the entire human race. They just didn't see eye to eye. And except this dude, he had every box checked on the crazy person checklist. You had murderer, grave robber, cannibal, necrophile, interior decorator, fashion designer. You can say a lot about the maniac, but he was a true Renaissance man. Give him that. A jackass of all trades and one hell of a mama's boy. To sum up, he'd spend his evenings eating his dinner of pork and beans, reading the obituaries and whatever, and then out in the dead of night, he'd go out to the cemetery, locate the unlucky winner, dig her up, and while engulfed in the stench of decay and his bean farts, he'd just take the body parts he wanted or the whole body back to his house and get creative. And look, we all need a hobby. All right, fine. I guess. But in addition to the book Deviant, the man inspired a decent amount of movies, song lyrics, and movie villains. So I want to talk about 5 Ed Gein inspired films. So let's get at it. All right, movie number 1. And this is the one that started it all. The movie that taught us a valuable lesson.
A boy's best friend is his mother.
In 1958, just a year or so after the events of the Gein estate made headlines, author Robert Bloch banged out his book Psycho in just 6 weeks. And by April of 59, publisher Simon & Schuster put it in the stores. Now, a little backstory on that whole thing there. The popular consensus has been for decades that Bloch, without a doubt, based the protagonist, Norman Bates, solely on Ed Gein. And I can see how people came to that conclusion. I thought the same thing myself for the longest time. And the fact that Bloch wrote it just, less than a year after the Gein story made headlines. There are definitely some similarities between Bates and Gein, that's for sure. The whole mother-son angle. But what's weird is, according to Bloch's unauthorized autobiography, Once Around the Block, cute, I see what he did there, published in 93, he claims that he only heard the whole Gein story years after he already wrote his book, and he was shocked upon hearing all the similarities. I don't know. I don't know, something stinks with that, man. I don't know what to believe on that. But back in 1957, Bloch, like Ed, he was also this small town guy living in a town whose name I'm probably going to butcher, but the town of Waiawega in Wisconsin. 35 miles from where Gein lived. Like, hey, Mr. Bloch, you ever pick up a newspaper or turn on the radio back in 57? I get that this was way before the 24-hour news cycle we have today, but come on, man. Like, word travels fast, especially in a small Midwestern town when a murderer and grave robber has been caught decorating his house with vaginas. But all right, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Some people close to Bloch have said that, yeah, he did base Norman Bates at least partly on Gein, but some people say it was mostly based on a man named Calvin Thomas Beck, who was the publisher of Castle of Frankenstein magazine. I've never seen it, and I can only find one picture of this dude. That's it. But supposedly, the people who knew Bloch personally claim he was obsessed with Beck and the bizarre relationship he had with his clingy, dominating, and perhaps mentally unstable mother. And that's plausible because in the book Psycho, there are actually more similarities, not just physically, but the relationship with his mother in the way Mrs. Bates would berate Norman was very similar to Bloch's experiences with Beck and his mother. And in the book, Bates isn't really at all like the young, slender, sympathetic boy next door character he's portrayed as in the movie. In the book, he's a balding, overweight dude with glasses, in his 40s, and a heavy drinker, just like Beck was. And the relationship between Beck and his mother is also bizarre because it was the bizarre way they'd interact together, a little creepy and weird. And that was much more similar to how Bates was than to Gein, how Gein and his mother were. Years later, Bloch supposedly recanted and stated that, yes, Gein was a partial inspiration for Norman Bates. When it comes down to it, who knows? It was 64 years ago, and everyone is dead and gone, but regardless of what nutbag the book was based on, shortly after its release, director Alfred Hitchcock and Paramount bought up the rights, and in 1960, Psycho came out. Now, what in the hell can I say about Psycho that hasn't already been said a billion times by film historians and whoever? It's a movie about Marion Crane, a bank secretary. She steals $40K, hightails it out of town, and then crashes, at the hotel run by everybody's favorite incel, Norman Bates, and his charming mother. And a lot of you who haven't seen the movie, you probably already know the story anyway, because the whole the degree, the popularity of the Bates Motel series. So I won't really go much more into that. But a little backstory to the movie, though. Hitchcock was proud of this one, and he should have been. And he made damn sure at all costs to protect the twist ending. And legend has it that Hitchcock bought up the novel all over the country as much as he could find to keep the twist from getting out. It's probably bullshit, but it's true. He wouldn't release anything about the plot to the press. He made sure to keep them in the dark as much as he possibly could get away with, and as much as Paramount would let him get away with. The movie trailers wouldn't show much to appease the press. He'd summarize the plot by saying, it's the story of a young man whose mother was a homicidal maniac. That's a terrible fucking impression. And another trick he pulled was when the movie came out, and this was a testament to the kind of pull that Hitchcock had with the theater industry back then. If you showed up a couple minutes late to the ticket booth, you're not getting in, bro. Sorry. Try the next one. And because he was adamant that you got to watch this thing from beginning to end so you didn't miss anything important that was relevant to the twist. Now, And because of the unusual campaign of secrecy, the public's curiosity got the better of them. And on June 16th, 1960, they were lined up around the block to get the shit scared out of them. Hitchcock and Paramount's gamble paid off. On a budget of 800,000 or so, it grossed over $40 million back in 1960 dollars. That's a pretty damn good gamble, if you ask me.
Righteous bucks.
The thing that sucks, though, is it got shafted at the Academy Awards. It got 4 nominations, which is like, all right, that's something, but no Oscar win, not even for Hitchcock, who at least he was nominated. He'd been nominated 4 previous times anyway by the Academy and never won shit. And if he ever deserved the Oscar, it was for Psycho, but he lost. Anthony Perkins didn't even get a nomination as Norman. And The Apartment with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine got most of the honors that year. I mean, all right, good movie. But really, I love Jack Lemmon and all, but and it was a good movie. But you got this one movie, this landmark achievement in horror, suspense, cinematography, and directing. A movie whose impact on pop culture has been felt for over half a century, inspired countless filmmakers and composers, been studied and discussed by film historians. I think they actually teach classes now and then about it in film schools. And then you have The Apartment. I mean, it's a cute little movie with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. I do recommend it. I think the other awards were partially due to Hollywood's love affair with Billy Wilder, the director of The Apartment. And he was their golden boy, and he was no slouch for what it's worth. I mean, before his death, he had 21 Oscar nominations and won 6 of them. But Psycho should have been Hitchcock's year, and it wasn't. That's how short-sighted the Academy was back then. And they were notoriously biased anyway against anything suspense or in the horror genre. But just the fact that it was nominated was a huge achievement. But it is what it is, as they say. All right, movie number 2. We got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of my personal favorites forever. I saw this at the age of 12 and was in love with it. This one came along in 1974 and just fucked up audiences. What a great time to be alive, man. It was so much easier to shock people back then. I know there were all these stories of people puking in their seats and passing out in the aisles and running screaming from the theater. It might just be folklore, but who knows? The events of the movie, they had pretty much nothing to do with the events of Gein's actual life, though. Leatherface, the character, is based loosely on Gein and his love of wearing human faces and leaving body parts all over the damn floor. But that's pretty much where the similarity ends. To sum it up, it's a movie, about Sally and her annoying brother Franklin, probably the most profoundly aggravating character in horror history, at least until this kid came along. So they go pay a visit to their isolated little, their now dilapidated childhood home with a few friends in tow, and get picked off one by one by the friendly neighborhood cannibal. It was a movie that set the standard blueprint for the golden era of slasher films that came later in like the very early to mid 80s. Tobe Hooper, the director, he actually got the idea for the story during Christmas of 72 when he was in a department store of all places. The crowds were driving him nuts, and he just wanted to get his stuff and get the hell out. And it so happens he found himself right next to a chainsaw display. And he had one of those thoughts where, like one of those little intrusive thoughts, we've all had at one time or another, that are really twisted and fucked up. He imagined picking up the chainsaw and hacking his way through the crowd, just leaving a pile of bodies and a cloud of smoke in his wake. He obviously didn't do it, but but he wasn't in that much of a hurry, but it was just one of those fun little morbid thoughts that creep in sometimes that help you through the holidays when you're frustrated and sick to death of the mob of people. But just like that, there you go. Merry Christmas, everybody. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was born. I gotta say, the movie's got more of a slasher vibe to it than Psycho. It was kind of a precursor to the slashers. The thing is, though, so many people get it wrong, though, when thinking that it's a violent film. And by today's standards, it's not even that. I mean, there are mainstream dramas I see all the time that have more graphic, disgusting violence, and some of the film's most violent moments actually are suggestive or they kind of happen off screen. There's very little blood, in fact, and like I think no F-bombs. And that's because Hooper was trying for, of all things, a PG rating. So it would get into more theaters. And the problem was, by 74 standards, the subject matter was more of the problem. It was too horrific for PG. And his hopes were just shot to shit when the MPAA, the assholes, slapped an X rating on it, which basically condemns your movie, at least back then, as being considered untouchable by any of the major theater chains or small town theaters in America. So he'd cut more time off to appease the MPAA, but they just wouldn't budge. They wouldn't budge any further than an R rating, so he was stuck with it. It might have helped matters or probably hurt matters more. I don't know. They were originally going to name the movie Head Cheese. Kind of has an appetizing ring to it, but I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the much better to the point kind of title. When it was released, critics beat the shit out of it like it owed them money, but time has definitely been kinder to the film, and it's been recognized by critics and film historians in the recent decades and been praised as a landmark achievement in horror filmmaking. Despite the critics pissing and moaning back then, it went on to gross 30 million bucks, and everybody involved making it made out great. Oh no, they didn't. The Colombo crime family did. Yeah, Bryanston Distribution Company, which bought the rights to the movie. It was run by a dude named Louis Butchie Pirano. You can see where this is going. And Bryanston was actually just a mob front, and the company lied their asses off to the cast and crew, stating that the movie's profits were only about $1 million, when in actuality they were like anywhere from 12 million on up.
Righteous bucks.
And years later, Bryanston got exposed, went belly up. I'm sure some people got clipped. No. Wound up in the river somewhere or in prison, but the filmmakers and the cast sued, but unfortunately the company was bankrupt. There was nothing to take. And it wasn't until 1983 when New Line Cinema, the house that Freddie built, when they bought up the rights, and people were finally able to, finally get a few bucks for their efforts. Better late than never, I suppose. We're going to stay right in 1974. About 7 months before Chainsaw appeared, a movie called Deranged came out. And for whatever reason, it failed to generate the same buzz as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Budget problems, perhaps. It was made in Canada. Maybe that was the problem. I don't know. And it had a premiere in LA back in 74, but it just didn't grab attention. And I guess it got lost in that giant Titanic-sized wake of Chainsaw. But if you want a movie that's more closely based on Gein and his life, start there. And it's the story of Ezra Cobb. And if this guy's looking familiar to you, he should. You know him. He scared the hell out of you as a kid. You definitely know his face. Gray-bearded, shovel-wielding nightmare fuel. Yes, I'm talking about the South Bend shovel slayer, Old Man Marley in Home Alone.
Merry Christmas. Played
by Robert Bloch. I think he was the perfect combination of grizzled creepiness to play Cobb/Gein. Supposedly he was a sweet dude in real life, but I can't find much else about him. But the film does take a little artistic license with some of the facts. You got a couple name changes, a couple of fictional events, one involving a seance scene, which is more comical than it is creepy. The effects are, 70s. I mean, I got to hand it to makeup legend Tom Savini, though. This was his first cinematic makeup gig, and aside from the fake blood that looked a little like melted crayons, the rest of the effects are actually pretty good for low budget. And there are a few weird artistic choices by the director, like having a narrator appear periodically just kind of catches you off guard a little by breaking the fourth wall. But in the context of the film, it works. There's definitely a level of dark humor that just kind of lying beneath everything, which works when you consider the subject matter is so friggin' twisted.
I know I can trust her.
Why do you think you can trust her, Ez?
Oh, 'cause she's fat. I know I can trust her. She's fat.
I gotta say, Roberts definitely carries the movie, but the other standout to me, besides Ezra, obviously, is it helps the film. It's that biblical Rock of Ages, creepy ass organ music that's just softly murmuring in the background. I would use that as my ringtone if it wasn't so damn quiet. I mean, it's the perfect combo along with Roberts to help create that sense of dread. I actually considered using it for my music channel for like a 3-5 second opener or whatever, but I might still do that. It's fucking perfect. Carl Zitterer, I think his name is, he wrote the music, and he went on to score the original Black Christmas that same year. And eventually he'd score the movies like Porky's and Prom Night with Jamie Lee Curtis, and of all things, A Christmas Story. And in fact, he worked with Bob Clark a lot. And for those of you who don't know who he is, he was the director of the original Black Christmas and Christmas Story. And I don't know, the dude seemed really determined to leave his mark on the holidays there. But Clark just decided to co-produce that, though. And weird thing is, the other producer of the movie was, of all things, a concert promoter named Tom Carr. He promoted shows back in the day, like in the 70s, for bands like, like Zeppelin and the Bee Gees and Creedence, James Taylor, Sonny and Cher, just to name a few. He was fascinated with Gein and he wanted to make a movie, so he did. And he took the money he made from the music industry and made The Range. So thanks, Tom.
You are a Sunday school teacher, a woman of God Almighty. He commands you to awake and arise.
In the early 2000s, there was this small wave of these low-budget serial killer films. They weren't bad. They weren't great either, but they were fun. At least they got some good actors to play the starring roles. And at least these movies stayed close to the actual facts. You had Gacy with Mark Holton, Buxton from Pee-wee in the title role. You had Ted Bundy.
Hi there, my name's Ted. Nice to meet you.
You had the Hillside Strangler with C. Thomas Howell, Ponyboy Curtis from The Outsiders.
Stay gold, Ponyboy.
You had Dahmer, one of Jeremy Renner, Hawkeye's first roles. But the first one to come out, I think, was the Ed Gein movie with Steve Railsback in the starring role. And he was best known, I think, for playing Charlie Manson in the TV miniseries Helter Skelter. And if you're having no luck on the internet finding the Ed Gein movie, I don't know, sometimes it's not available for streaming, but you can find the DVD maybe. It also goes by the title, the alternate title, in or By the Light of the Moon or something like that. This movie just took the approach of just playing the facts straight up, pretty much. I mean, I guess the producers felt that the story itself is bizarre and interesting enough to just be told 95% as it was, with the exception of a few tiny little changes. But Railsback is great in it. And he doesn't try to be Leatherface or Bates or Ezra Cobb. He just plays the man, and he does a great job with it. Like creepy at times, sometimes sympathetic, sometimes straight up pathetic, and a bit of a dope. I guess either he or the producers decided to kind of humanize the limb collecting maniac, that he'd been caricatured for so long in movies and TV and everything. It was a refreshing take, but nothing spectacular. Mediocre effects. Definitely more for the horror junkies and serial killer fanatics out there like myself who just couldn't get enough of all that Ed Gein content. I enjoyed it, but I'm not going to set the bar with a high recommendation. But I will say it's the most accurate depiction of Gein that I've seen and that I'm aware of.
I command your heart to heal and start pumping again.
Ed, it's not happening. Give it up. You suck. Now we'll move on to movie number 5, Ed Gein, The Butcher of Plainfield. This one went straight for the horror approach by tossing aside the facts of the case pretty much and casting Kane Hodder as, like Jason Voorhees, number 7 through 10, to play Gein. I mean, okay, I wouldn't be afraid of the real Gein. He was a little dude, nowhere near as imposing as Kane was in terms of size and appearance. And Kane does a good job for what it's worth in a bad film. I mean, it has it all. Bad acting, bad dialogue, bad plot. It's basically low-budget fan fiction with some actors who have actual legit screen credits. You got Priscilla Barnes, who you might remember from like Three's Company. I think she had a bit in The Devil's Rejects as well. You got Michael Berryman from The Hills Have Eyes and Weird Science. The horror genre, look, I'll say this. As much as I love it, it is loaded with tons of mediocre garbage. When you see a horror film on IMDb with a ranking of 3.7 stars, even by horror standards, you're pretty much diving into a porta potty in terms of content. So watch this one at your own peril. Those are pretty much the closest Ed Gein-based movies you're going to find that I know of, besides Silence of the Lambs. I mean, the character of Buffalo Bill, he isn't solely based on Gein, though. He's actually an amalgam of Ed, Gary Heidnick, this murderer and rapist who kidnapped women in the 70s, and he'd hold them in this pit that he dug in his basement in Philadelphia. And, of course, Ted Bundy, who we're pretty much all friends with by now. And there are many other films that borrow small elements from Ed's life, like 1972's Three on a Meat Hook. Low budget, even by 70s amateur low budget standards. I wouldn't say it's the worst thing I've ever seen. I mean, I know my awfulness meter is usually a bit off from like what the mainstream considers terrible, but last I checked, it was free on Tubi. Look it up. And aside from that, you got a few mediocre Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequels. The 2003 remake that I loved. Psycho had 3 decent sequels, and with Anthony Perkins, and a pointless turd of a remake. If you want to spend some time, if you're that desperate to spend some time in the Gein multiverse, but unless you're more desperate for Gein, there's also an Ed Gein the musical. Remember what I said about diving into a porta potty? And last I checked, that was on Tubi as well. I don't know, might be gone by now. I couldn't get through the whole thing. I've watched tons of shit, but I do have some standards. Besides, I'm not much of a musical fan anyway.
Won't you love me? Won't you need me? Won't you dig me? For I will dig you too.
That's about all I can give you until the Gein series comes out on Netflix. I'm sure like the rest of the stuff Murphy puts out, it'll piss some people off, but most of the people involved are dead anyway. But I got to say, I'm a little less enthusiastic about Charlie Hunnam, Jax from Sons of Anarchy, being picked to play Ed. I mean, Gein was this unattractive little man with a lazy eye, but from the photo of Hunnam playing Gein that got leaked, I have some hope. I know they can use makeup and contact lenses to generate the look, but Gein had just a natural pathetic creepiness about him that all the makeup and CGI pretty much can't duplicate. I mean, I'll give it a chance. Hunnam's a good actor. He might be able to pull it off, but time will tell. Anyways, that pretty much sums it up. I just want to say thanks for watching my channel. If you can think of anything else that I might have missed or you want to correct me, I don't know, just throw it in the comments section below and we'll have it out. Till next time, have a good one.